Hello and namaskar. Welcome to this special show, Stalwarts Speak on IIPA. I'm Rakhee Bakshee. In this show, we talk to senior personalities who share their insights with us, and it only adds to our knowledge. Today again, we have a very special guest with us, somebody who's a very seasoned politician. He's a Rajya Sabha MP, President of ICCR, and he's also somebody who calls himself a student of political science, a researcher, but somebody who's also heads a very important committee in Rajya Sabha. So I am talking to Dr. Vinay Sahasrabudhhe ji. Thank you so much for joining this show, sir.
Namaskar, namaskar. Thank you.
It's such a pleasure to talk to you, and also on a day which is now being celebrated as International Museum Day. So why don't you speak about what is the importance of museum? Why do we need to preserve and conserve things?
See, after all, we don't live in a vacuum kind of a thing. Society is a living organism. And therefore, society means traditions, it means heritage, it means your past, and also the quintessential journey of the past, from the past through the present to the future. Now, this entire journey, in a way, is kind of symbolized in any institution which is a kind of a museum. Mm-hmm. So, museum is not just collection of some artifacts. Museum is also a living organism, kind of, and it has to be looked at from that angle. It has to be a live wire organization where things keep on happening. People will not just come to see dry kind of presentation of objects. There has to be some poetry in it. There has to be some narrative with it. There has to be some connection with the contemporary times. And therefore, I am happy the museums or the olden concept of museum is transforming and undergoing sea change, as what we see in the Pradhan Mantri Sangrahalaya, the latest example, if I have to cite.
Exactly. In fact, I was going to that only. It is such a connect that we are talking at a time that recently only it was inaugurated, the Pradhan Mantri Sangrahalaya, which talks not only about narrating India's story, but also looking at the glorious history and legacy of earlier prime ministers.
Precisely.
And the current prime minister inaugurated it.
Yeah, and in a way, it is the symbol of the democratic spirit, because the museum is dedicated to all the prime ministers, and it will continue to be doing so even in the future. So this is something very important. Earlier, Delhi used to have some 2-3 museums dedicated to 2-3 individual prime ministers, but now here is a museum under one roof. You would get to know the entire history of independent India through the lives and also some kind of commentary on their contributions of the prime ministers.
But tell us more about it, what we know about it. In fact, I'm yet to visit it, is that it has also used a lot of digital technology.
Yeah.
It's very modern in its approach.
It is a very modern museum, I would say state-of-the-art museum, if I may use the term, and all kinds of modern technologies, including artificial intelligence and virtual reality, so on and so forth. You will be able to witness those technologies being implemented, being used in presenting the stories of the prime ministers, in a way the story of the independent India. And more importantly, it provides an insight into all the happenings which perhaps many times even the history textbooks do not tell you. Because unfortunately in our country, the history textbooks were so kind of conceived that the emphasis on post-independence India is precious little. Now, at least that backlog, I believe, has been done away with by this museum.
Now, also talk about this vision that India has and how these museums, these kind of narratives which talk about India and its ethos would really help the youth in understanding the nation better.
Well, right at the beginning I said that after all, the youth also has to understand what exactly he is representing. He is the citizen of today, and he carries along with him a glorious history of India, India's past, and also he has to be conscious about India's present, and he has to be aiming about a glorious future for our country. And to get that sense, you have to look back.
Yeah.
Now, when you look back, you have to understand also what all has happened and how it happened and why it happened. That will give you some kind of a knowledge base, some vision to look towards the future. Future cannot be disconnected from the past, because both the things are connected by the present.
Talking about cultural diplomacy also, because you're the president of ICCR, how do you think India is placed currently?
Well, I think India is a country which had such a huge potential, but unfortunately it has not been exploited in the right sense of the term. We have not been able to build upon the potential that India has. For example, if I just give you one example, that India is perhaps the only country in the global community, in the Committee of Nations, that enjoys goodwill practically at every nook and corner of the globe. I haven't come across any country where India or Indians are hated. But this goodwill, although very, very important, is not enough, because we require to cultivate a proper and a sound understanding about the idea of India. That we have not been able to do. And therefore, India, unfortunately, while people love it all over the world, few people perhaps, I'm afraid, understand what India means. India and the idea of India requires deeper insight, deeper understanding because of the diversity that we have.
Exactly.
People find it very difficult to match the things because they never come across a country with this kind of a massive diversity, if I may put it this way. Languages, the eating habits, the culinary and cuisine traditions, the music over here, everything. It's different region-wise.
Exactly.
But then people will have to be made to understand that this apparent diversity, in fact, is the diverse manifestation of the innate unity that we have.
Incredible, innovative, and talking about ICCR and the kind of efforts, one can see individually also that you're traveling so much, that ICCR is looking at or charting out for itself.
Well, basically, as I said, our objective is to ensure that the global community understands India properly. And this we definitely would like to do through culture. So developing that understanding about Indian culture is almost synonymous with the understanding of the idea of India.
Talking about public administration, that's what on behalf of IIPA I would really like to focus on and get some views from you. You yourself are so involved, in this, and you also run already an organization which is doing the same thing, and you are also an expert on public policy. Talk about this whole connection between how we should look at public administration, to look at governance, and to look at citizen-centric, schemes which should be in the forefront.
Well, basically, I believe it's a big challenge before all democratic countries. I'm a student of political science and more so of democracy. And what I have realized that democracy as an idea is welcome everywhere, even today. So popularity of democracy was never under question, but efficacy of democracy has always been questioned. I mean, why there are people who do not adhere to democratic principles, yet call their countries as democratic, republic, and so on and so forth. They are namesake republics. They are not true republics. But they know there is a political correctness attached to that if we call our country a republic. I don't want to name the countries, but there are countries which call themselves as democratic country, as a republic country. Unfortunately, there is no democracy as such there. So, popularity of democracy is established. Political correctness that goes along with it is undoubted. But the efficacy of democracy, unfortunately, is questioned. Recently, I had been in a former USSR country. I won't name the country. And I was discussing with the people over there as to how do they feel post-1989 after the USSR as such was put to an end. And we have now several republics. I was just discussing and seeking some feedback. So some of them, although they were a little hesitant, but they said that the olden days perhaps were better. So they had no quarrel with the kind of rule that was there during the USSR. It was certainly not the kind of democracy as what you and me understand. But they found it perhaps preferred better, because today there are certain challenges which unfortunately the present day democratic government in their country is not able to meet. Here comes the importance of public administration, because democracy will have to deliver through efficient administration. There is one very well-known political scientist, Pippa Norris, in the Kennedy School of Government. She has made a thesis and she calls it as combined theory. She says, liberal democracy, wonderful, it is a must, but it has to be kind of accompanied by a statecraft which is very effective. Simply liberal democracy may not be that effective. You have to ensure that under every liberal democracy, there is an efficient statecraft attached to that. And if I may put it that way, what Prime Minister Narendra Modi has been attempting is precisely this.
Yes, absolutely. Effective administration, you're talking about minimum government, maximum governance. So basically dealing with things very efficiently and, in a very alert manner, so to say. Also, a lot of emphasis is there now on digital technology, because digital methods would also ease systems. What would you say, sir?
Yeah, well, I mean, that is one of the very welcome steps taken by the present establishment. And not only it adds to the efficiency, it saves time and all those things, but then there is a great deal of transparency and accountability that goes with digitization.
Exactly.
Because you cannot hoodwink the people. I mean, it is at that very moment that transaction happens. Take the example of Janadhana accounts and how they were effectively used during the pandemic times when government wanted to ensure direct transfer of benefits. So I think it's a wonderful thing. India should have done it perhaps far too before. But I'm happy now that the new parliament is coming, and we are told that the new parliament will have an arrangement where perhaps we can see some kind of a paperless parliament. You can have the laptops or things like that right in front
More
of
emphasis you mean on
and
that.
you can get all the access to all the papers, whether they are questions or the answers tabled by the ministers or the various papers or the bills and so on and so forth. You will get them with a click of a mouse.
So e-governance would really be at work.
Perfect.
Exactly. You've been traveling to Northeast, sir, and we're talking about how we can really put in more ideas to make the outreach better. I mean, it is already a great part of our proud part of our country, but how it really makes it more meaningful when we connect with each other, communicate with each other more often.
Well, I believe while the government is definitely doing all kinds of efforts to ensure the development of Northeast and, in a way, the mainstreaming of our brothers and sisters in all the 8 states of Northeast, as Ashtalakshmi has been described by many. But one thing I would suggest that to ensure this proper understanding about the people in Northeast India, perhaps it would be a good idea if certain universities also kind of open Department of Northeast India Studies. Because Northeast again requires deeper insight. Sensibilities are associated with that. If you go to Nagaland and if you don't know what is Kohima and you consider that Dimapur is its capital, you're wrong. And it offends people in Nagaland, and rightly so. Would I like that in Maharashtra you are coming and you don't know that Mumbai is our capital? I would not. I will take objection to that. I will feel insulted. Same. People don't know Itanagar. People consider Manipur is like Nagpur and Jabalpur, which it is not. So these are fundamentals, and we need to create deeper understanding, awareness about the diverse lifestyles over there, about their own history, about their own contribution. Take the example of agriculture. Now they have a wonderful Zoom cultivation. But do people in agriculture universities in these parts of our country, whether in Gujarat or Maharashtra or Rajasthan or Karnataka, have we understood what is Zoom cultivation? Can we not just go over there? Prime Minister Modi has mooted the idea of Ek Bharat Shrestha Bharat. It's a program wherein this kind of cultural exchange between various groups continues to happen. That requires to be further strengthened, and I'm sure with that we will have the objective of mainstreaming of Northeast India, which more or less we are fast and speedily achieving as well, I'm sure, but further impetus in academic arena is also required.
So with your extensive experience in, as you said, research, political science, and you say that you're evolving and it's only an elevation for you that you became the Rajya Sabha MP. The committee, which is very important, and you head, which includes women, children, education, youth, sports. What would you say about the social development right now, the inclusion part, and all of this being taken ahead?
Well, I believe if you look at the history of India's governance during the last 7-8 years, the new policies, the new programs, all these things are aiming at bridging this gap and putting an end to this divide. And I'm not talking about economic divide, but the social divide as well. And therefore, in every other way, the government is attempting towards democratization. Janadhan, what is Janadhan? Janadhan is not just economic inclusion. Yes, it is. But economic inclusion is also leading to some kind of a social inclusion, some kind of a developmental inclusion. So that was a pathway towards that, and that is happening. Now take example of our scheduled caste communities, and many people, unfortunately, even today, although the government has put an end to this practice of carrying night soil on your heads, but then manual scavenging continues to take place at some places. Now you will be happy to know that seeking some support through Mudra and several other government schemes, there are many people who are working towards putting an end to this practice of manual scavenging. Some new kind of technologies have been developed, new kind of machines have been provided, and these machines are being handled by young entrepreneurs, and they are helping the municipalities to put an end to manual scavenging. It is not a social revolution.
Of course, it is putting dignity also where it is due, sir.
Very, very much important. So I believe insofar as this inclusion is concerned, the emphasis of this government is something very, very remarkable. Take the example of mother tongues, because language is one of the very sensitive issues. Now the policy of giving emphasis on all mother tongues, all regional languages, it's so very important. Now, in a way, it is an example of linguistic democracy, if I may put it that way. You can learn medicine and engineering in, let's say, Odia, or maybe Assamese, or maybe Kashmiri language, or Tamil, or Marathi. If a French person can learn medicine or engineering in French, why a Telugu person cannot? We are ensuring this for the first time.
Yes, sir. So, which also means that the NEP, which has a holistic approach, is really taken into...
Yes, of course, it is gradually unfolding, because the policy was adopted. That time it was Corona, and therefore the pandemic naturally impacted. Some kind of a delay was there. But I believe now all our universities, all our schools and colleges are now sufficiently geared up to implement the new national education policy.
So to all those viewers who are watching, many of them which represent the young India, so the youth there, would like to really understand the true relevance of public policy. You've been very closely involved in imparting training, knowledge. What would you tell them?
It's very simple that way, because as it happens, and Prime Minister Narendra Modi has been emphasizing on this, there's policy-driven governance. It's something very critical for success of democracy. Why? Because when there is a well-conceived policy in a particular area, in a particular subject, naturally in the light of that policy, all the welfare schemes and other programs and maybe whatever the rules, regulations that are framed, they get some shape out of the policy. The policy shapes all these things. The nature of the programs, the schemes, the projects, and even the rules and regulations. Now, when the policy serves as a guideline for all these things, it leads to some kind of a rule-based governance. And the element of discretion is taken away. So, when there is no discretion and there are certain frameworks of rules and regulations which are there to govern, which are there to help you take a call, naturally, the element of corruption gets reduced.
That's why emphasis on role now.
Correct. So, I'll give you an example. I was there in a district in Uttar Pradesh, and I was discussing with the district collector over there who came to meet me. I said, now that this Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, since we are talking about public administration,
yes,
and this is the institution dedicated, this is an important example. So I said, even in the olden days, there were welfare schemes. Some kind of Awas Yojana was there earlier also. But then the village panchayat leader or the MLA or anybody, a big shot in politics in that area, would emphasize or would rather pressurize the local administration to insert 3-4 names of his maybe relatives or close confidants or his karyakartas, whosoever, his party walas, in the list of the beneficiaries. and the administrators helplessly might be used to oblige. Today also, there might be people who would want to pressurize and do certain mischief in the list of the beneficiaries which you have prepared under a framework of rules and regulations. How do you cope up with this pressure today? I was asking. And the collector told me that today, during the last 7-8 years, the administration has become so very transparent and accountable, because at every other level, you have to provide some evidence. Either it is Aadhaar card or it is maybe some other documentary evidence, and then the photocopy of it or take a picture of it. Even the houses are coming up and you have to report that 3/4 of the construction is completed. You cannot just simply say it and get the money out of that. You have to show the picture, upload it, and then the collector or the whosoever the authority, they approve of it, and then you get the money. So everything is now evidence based. Therefore, you cannot do any mischief. You cannot put any other thing in between. So this is something very important, and this had something to do with the changing character of public administration.
You very well said that, sir. Transparency, accountability, which have really become the highlights. So now the message for IIPA and people, of course, once again, as to how institutions like this, not only this, but many other, would really take up this whole idea of making people understand what our country is, how we can really give it a good push collectively.
Well, I think not just this institution, but every other institution and the institutional life that takes shape in every other institution. I believe we are facing certain crises, generally speaking, and it's a global thing, not confined to India. The first one is the crisis of purpose. Why exactly are we into public administration? One has to be able to understand that, and in a convincing manner and very honestly. We keep on saying, oh, I want to serve the people. If somebody says, really? Do you have an honest answer to that? Many times we turn hypocrites and we remain oblivious of that. We don't accept that there is a distance between what we preach and what we practice. That has to be put an end. And to put a full stop to that, you have to first of all meet with this and deal with this crisis of purpose. Arising out of this crisis of purpose, there is a crisis of authenticity. Whatever we have to do, we have to be doing honestly. And we have to ensure that whatever we do is very authentic. It is not spurious. It is not superficial. It is not just a tick mark activity. We have to sincerely work towards that. Thirdly, there has to be facing a challenge, which is the crisis of ownership. The surroundings in which you are, you have to take ownership of it. Whether you are an administrator, then your office, you are supposed to own it up. You cannot say, oh, I am doing good things, but all others are bad. That cannot be the answer.
Team leadership also.
Correct. So that ownership. And then the crisis of relationship. That also will have to be dealt with effectively. Because relationship breakdown is seen everywhere, practically, very unfortunately. And that is impacting the institutional lives in many institutions. I believe if we effectively deal with this, institutions like Indian Institute of Public Administration, again, people expect that the institution that talks about public administration also sets an example of a good institutional administration.
Sure, sir.
So all these things put together, I'm sure there is a glorious future for this kind of an institution, which has already served the cause of governance in this country for several decades.
For comprehensive and very patiently answering all my questions. Thank you so much, sir, for your time.
It was a pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much.
Who talked about range of issues, and I'm sure that you would love watching it as much I did when I interviewed him. Thank you so much for once again on IIPA. Namaskar.